Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is at the Brown County Library, interviewing candidates in the 2014 election, talking to Mr. Dan Robinson of De Pere. He's a Democratic candidate in Assembly District 88. Dan, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thanks, Steve. I'm glad to be here.
Programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. First-time candidate for state office?
For state office,
Give us the short version of your bio, please.
Sure. My wife Laura and I have been married for 28 years, and we have 3 grown children that are on their own and doing their own thing and making their way in the world, so we feel very blessed about that. And I have worked at St. Norbert College now in my 13th year there. Started out in ministry in the parish on campus, and was the first director of the Center for Community Service and Learning, which is our program that gets our students off campus doing community service work. And then currently in administration in student affairs. 6 years in the De Pere City Council, currently in my second term on the Brown County Board of Supervisors, and been involved in a number of different community groups in there, including chair of the Board of Trustees for the St. John's Homeless Shelter, Bay Area Community Council, their Economic Development Committee, just a lot of different things.
Local officials, I like to ask this question. Impact of Act 10 since you've been a locally elected official?
Sure. I think it's been a challenge. My experience on the De Pere City Council was we heard a lot about the tools that local government we're going to have to take advantage of, and frankly in De Pere we were already doing a lot of that and had come to some agreements with our unions that about their contributions for health care and things like that. So it didn't really actually have much of an impact during the time that I was on the city council. And so I feel like the sacrifices that were made for people to give up their bargaining rights weren't necessarily worth the supposed benefits that came through.
Okay. Your website said you'd like to reform taxes so the low and middle income don't pay more than their fair share. Are they paying more than their fair share now, Dan?
Sure. Right now, it's a great question. Right now in Wisconsin, and studies that I've seen talk about people in the low 20%, middle up to about 80%. They're paying typically, if you take all the taxes, income, property and sales tax together, they're paying about 9.5% to 10.5% of their income, those that are households that are non-elderly households. But if you look at the top 4% or even the top 1%, it dips down to as low as 6.9% of their income. It seems to me the least that we can do is look at our whole. How do we make that more equitable across the board so that people are paying their fair share?
Do you have any specific plans to do that? Would you implement a new tax bracket, or would you raise taxes on those with AGIs above a certain number?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that you can do. It's not just about raising taxes. Maybe sometimes it's about cutting taxes. We talk a lot about tax cuts, about tax relief for people that are at the lower end of the income spectrum. So I think it's a combination of things. There's been a lot of talk about listening sessions around the state, and I think that's fine that we do those. I'm a big supporter of getting out to the community and trying to hear from them. But when we do that, I think we need to not just talk about income taxes, which is what we talk a lot about, or we not just talk about property taxes, but we have to take the tax structure as a whole and talk about all those ways that we as citizens and as taxpayers contribute to the working of government. And so I think that's the kind of conversation we need to have.
Okay. One of the biggest items in the next state budget, of course, will be aid to public schools.
Sure.
If you're a member of the Assembly, you would be pushing for what in terms of aid to public schools in the next budget cycle? Well,
I think we need to, at the very least, start to look at putting back the money that's been cut over the last 4 years. I mean, I think when I go out and I talk to folks in the district, one of the top issues that I hear about is support for public schools. Education is incredibly important to parents, to teachers, to the community as a whole, to business owners, because they're looking to hire folks that have the training that they need in order to be good employees. And that all starts with our public education system, because that's the way we serve all students, everyone in the community. So I think we need to look at trying to put back some of that funding to make our public schools stronger. That's going to help not only our children and our families, but it's also going to help our economic development. I've gotten support from school board members, from teachers, from and parents, a whole variety of folks that would agree that, yes, we need to put more resources into public education.
A big part of that debate over K-12 issues deals with vouchers and choice programs.
Sure.
What's your position on that?
Well, I'm not in favor of the voucher program. I think what that does is it takes funding away from our public education system. That's the system that we are constitutionally required to provide in the state. That's the system that serves everyone. And if we want to have a government and an economy that works for everyone, then we need to have schools that work for everyone. So I'm not in support of certainly expanding the voucher program and the voucher program in general. Now, if it's going to continue, it seems to me the least that we can do from a stewardship standpoint in being responsible for the public money is to have the same accountability for those schools that accept public funding as the public schools do. So those are a couple things I would look at.
Would you continue choice in the city of Milwaukee, which has had it for more than 25 years?
Well, again, I think a lot of that needs to be up to the people that are living in Milwaukee. I'm talking more about the state and what are we doing as a state as a whole, and certainly for the people in the 88th district.
When you talk about the state, there's a cap on choice statewide of 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to maintain that cap? Do you want to eliminate that cap? The Assembly Speaker wants to remove the cap.
I'm not in support of removing the cap. No.
You're not? Okay. 2 months ago, Governor Walker called for the withdrawal of Wisconsin from Common Core standards. Your position?
No, I don't think. I think it's way too early to talk about that. Common Core standards are just that. They're standards. They're not a curriculum. It's not telling people how to teach or what textbooks to use. That's all local control decisions. And I'm a big fan, having worked in local government and having seen how responsive it can be to the people that are in the community. I really think we need to keep those decisions at the local level. All the Common Core standards do is they say these are the benchmarks that we're looking for, but those curriculum decisions are still at the local level. We have invested a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money into trying to make that work, and we're just getting started with that. I think it's way too early to pull the plug on that. I think it concerns me that some people that are calling for that are calling it for reasons other than the welfare of our kids and the benefit of our schools. And I think that's what we need to keep utmost in mind. And I think the Common Core gets us moving in that direction.
Transportation funding. The Wisconsin Taxpayer Alliance says if we fund transportation programs statewide at 2013 levels for 10 years, we have a $2 billion deficit. How would you make up any deficit in our transportation spending?
Well, the first thing I would do is I'm supportive of the constitutional amendment that's on the ballot that says that funds need to stay in the transportation fund.
The lockbox.
Yeah, we cannot be rating that. And I think that's true for any fund. If you're budgeting as a family, it works the same way in government. If you put money in a spot, you need to have it there for mortgage payments or whatever it is. If we put money into any fund that's earmarked for something, we need to keep it in there for that. So that's the first thing I would do, is I would make sure that those funds stay in there. Then I think any funds that needed to supplement that from the general revenue of the state, I think we need to look at budgeting as a whole, and maybe we need to transfer some money from some other programs in there. And the way we fix that, so now you're talking about the whole budget, and the transportation is just a piece of it. And I think the way there's a number of ways to fix that, but one of the ways I would do is to start accepting the Medicaid funds from the federal government. We're talking about over $200 in the last budget cycle that we could have saved if we had accepted the federal Medicaid money for Badger Care, and plus we would have provided insurance and health care for over 87,000 Wisconsinites. That's a win-win for us, and it helps fix budget holes that are going to be propping up things like the transportation fund.
So if we expanded MA, we'd get $200 million more. I think it might be $300 million in the next biennium.
Right, yep. Well, there's projections that range depending on the usage, yep.
You're absolutely right. But your point is, then that would make the general fund healthier. Maybe it could loan the transportation fund?
Yeah, well, again, budget's all about priorities. You look at the community and say, where are the priorities? And certainly having a safe transportation system is a big piece of that. We've got a lot of roads, especially local roads that need some state aid, that are not in safe condition, certainly bridges. So I think one of the things we need to look at is maintenance, to make sure people are safe traveling down the highway. So yeah, I think we need to look at that. I'm not saying that I know for sure that this much money should go to this project, but in principle, I think we need to say, what are the priorities for that general budget, and then where do we put it?
Would you consider raising the gas tax? That hasn't been increased since 2006. The $75 per car that you and I pay to register our vehicles, would you consider those?
Well, I think you need to look at all different sources of funding. I'm not saying I would raise that or not raise that. Again, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, that when we look at the tax structure in the state, we have to take it as a whole. I think the mistake that we make is we pick out this tax or we pick out that tax and we talk about it in isolation. Pretty soon those start to add up, and then we have a problem, or they don't add up and then we have a different kind of problem. I think that leads to short-term decision-making that doesn't serve the best interests of the people in our communities and in our state. We need to take a long view, and the only way you do that is to look at the tax structure as a whole.
You mentioned taking the federal MMA money for Medicaid.
Yep.
The American Hospital Association says our Medicaid reimbursement rates are the second lowest in the nation. Should they be increased?
Well, I certainly think we need to look at that. I mean, if that's true, that we are the second lowest in the country, then certainly I'm worried about the health care that's being provided to our community. That's the most important thing to me, is that the public health and that people have access to good health care. If there are doctors, and I actually just talked to somebody yesterday. I was knocking on the door, and a physician, I happened to open the door, and we got into a long conversation about all kinds of things, and this is one of them. And he's concerned about doctors getting out of the business, about practices going under. You know, if that's the case, and I don't know that it is, but if that's the case, then we need to look at our reimbursement rates for doctors and make sure that the people in low income are being served well, that we have good availability of doctors, especially in areas where there's shortages. So I think that's something we do need to look at.
A bill that was introduced will be coming back to legalize medical marijuana. Now Colorado and the state of Washington have legalized recreational marijuana. Your position on those issues?
Well, I think there's enough experience out there around the use of medical marijuana. And so, to go back to what I was saying before about public health and caring for people, I mean, there's enough evidence out there that people who are hurting, who have pain management issues and other illnesses that they're dealing with, that can be of help to them. And so I think medical marijuana is something we need to look at. I'm not in favor of trying to go for recreational use right now. I think that not only does that cause some problems in terms of public health, but I also think it creates a lot of confusion for residents in the state and for law enforcement, because you've got two sets of laws you're dealing with now. The federal law that says it's illegal and the state law that says it's legal. And I think that's one of the struggles they're having in those other states.
New subject, the environment. The bill that passed early last session that laid the groundwork for Gogebic-Taconite to potentially apply for a permit to mine in Ashland and Iron counties.
Sure.
Would you have voted for it?
No, I would not have. I mean, Wisconsin has a long history of mining, and I'm certainly not making a statement on that. What I'm talking about is that specific bill, that specific situation, and I think it goes back to, again, caring for the environment and the public health. Whenever we lower environmental and public health standards in order to accommodate a single project, that's got to be a red flag. I mean, we have to make decisions not just for this one specific situation, but for across the state and for generations to come. And that really concerns me, that we're lowering our public health and our environmental standards just to accommodate this one project.
In the debate over frac sand mining, it's probably not an issue in your district, but that's between those who say that the state government should set standards and no local government could go beyond it, and that it's the other side, it's a purely local control issue. Your position?
Sure. Well, again, because that doesn't affect my area in particular, I haven't as much looked at that specific issue yet as I have more the issue of local control. Again, coming out of city council, coming out of county board, I have a lot of local government experience. In my experience, people feel much more comfortable coming to somebody that they see at the grocery store or at the school or wherever to talk about local issues. I email people, they call me up, but I think the more removed you get from that, it's not that I don't want to hear from people. I do want to hear from them. But I think sometimes they are much more comfortable and more accessible at the local level. So I think my bias is we always look at, can this be handled at the local level? I think local decisions are really strong. Now, there's some issues that that's not the case. Certainly when you're looking at statewide laws or looking at some public safety issues or health and human services or prisons or just a whole host of things that need to be handled at the state level. But I think in situations like that, we need to sort of our first knee-jerk reaction say, well, can this be handled at the local level? Because if it can, then maybe that's where it needs to stay.
First offense, drunken driving, should it be a crime?
Yeah, I think it needs to be. I mean, that's serious when you get behind the wheel of a moving vehicle, and you can do a lot of damage if you're not at your best. And so I think it needs to be. And I think, we're the only state in the union that's not the case, and I think there's a reason for that. I think others have recognized how dangerous that can be.
Finally, do you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent on November 4?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, as I've talked about earlier in this interview, is that I have a lot of local government experience, which means I have a lot of experience working with folks from a lot of different points of view. At the local level, it's not partisan races, it's not Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or Green. It's how do we find common ground? How do we figure out a practical, common sense solution to this, and let's get it going. So that's the kind of attitude and experience that I would bring to Madison, where I think it needs a little bit more of that.
Thank you. Dan Robinson of De Pere is a Democratic candidate in Assembly District 88. Dan, thanks for talking to Wisconsin
Thanks, Steve.
Eye.
Appreciate it. Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.